Hi everyone, welcome back to a podcast of one's own. We are Edinburgh Napier's Feminist Society, who every 2 weeks like to round up what we've been talking about in recent sessions or socials. During the month of November, we've been talking about disability in depth, and as we're recording, it is now officially Disability History Month in the UK. And this year, the History Month is from the 18th of November to the 20th of December, but we started a little bit early so that we could dedicate semester time to these discussions. Recently, we had our last educational session of the disability block, which was entitled Accessibility and Feminism. In that, we looked at different types of accessibility and how certain issues manifest in different social justice movements. So we looked at Black Lives Matter and the climate justice movement as well. We then had a look at different layers of those issues, mostly breaking down the assumptions that people have or may have about disabilities only being visible, and the idea that you're only disabled if you use a wheelchair or have amputations, etc. That's why this week we want to talk a little bit more about invisible disabilities, diagnosis and hierarchies within the community. I say we because I am not alone. I am joined virtually by Aurora. Would you like to introduce yourself, Aurora?
Hello, I'm Aurora. I'm the treasurer as well of the Fem Soc. I'm sorry, I keep mixing names still up. Feminist Society, fourth year,
Nice.
23, and a late diagnosis of ADHD.
Are you single? Do you want to throw that in as well? I'm looking for this, blah, blah, blah. That's great. Thank you. And also, we are joined by Grace. She's a first year student and also obviously new to Fem Soc, but I will let her introduce herself. Welcome, Grace.
Hi, so I'm Grace. I'm 18 and I'm a first year, and I've got 3 learning disabilities. So I'm dyspraxic, dyslexic, and I have dyscalculus as well. So yay!
Triple Ds.
Yep.
Great. Very qualified, I suppose. Before I start going into the main topics, as this is probably maybe the last disability podcast that we're going to be doing for a little while, I wanted to ask both of you, looking back at what you've learned or what you've heard about, has anything surprised the both of you?
I think one thing that I was kind of surprised about more with our sort of the first one about the sort of history and everything, I've surprised how recent it all is. Like, because I mean, if you look at sort of other big movements and stuff, they've been happening for sort of years, but with the sort of disability, it's actually kind of shocking when you realize it's kind of like sort of late 90s and 2000s. Like, that's basically like my whole lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I was also quite surprised how late everything is. I mean, not surprised because we all know society is disappointing, but in a disappointing way, surprised at how late all of that is. And I think, like, in my own research, I was again disappointingly surprised at how long waiting times are often for these kind of things. You'd hope they'd be more of a priority in a way, but they're clearly not.
Yeah, I think when you go into this topic, you think, oh, it can't be that bad. It can't be that awful for disabled people. Surely that these things have been put in place forever, and these topics and issues are, withstanding. Obviously, you look at other social justice movements, like you say, Grace, and you think, oh, these origins must have been around. This is just a continual fight, but actually, we're still sort of in the origin stage of it. And one thing we spoke about in the session was the idea that it's only within when we're talking about feminism here, like in the third wave of feminism, that disability and intersectional issues have been included and sort of joined together. With that, also within the disability community, it's only really recently that the awareness of invisible disabilities has come around, and almost this idea that the disability movement has opened up to actually let more disabled people in. So I wanted to ask both of you, in terms of your own conditions, have you ever struggled or been resistant, or are you resistant in calling what you have a disability? What's your feelings on that?
I don't mind. Like, I think for me it's because for me it's so new because I only got my diagnosis in September, so it's been 2 months. I don't think my brain has caught up to the fact when I still hear like about like disability activists and disabled groups, that kind of stuff is still like very much they're not the same as me, even though now I like kind of belong to that group. So yeah, I don't know, it's like kind of new to me.
And what about you, Grace?
Well, I mean, I've always kind of been aware that I've had it, and it's like, and I know it's classified as a sort of disability, but there's the whole idea of like a disability is like a physical thing and stuff. And sort of growing up, I was like, well, wait, am I like disabled because I don't have sort of like a physical. But I think as I've gotten older, I've just kind of been like, well, I don't mind saying I have it, and it's like just one of those things that you kind of just sort of like, yeah, I've got this condition, and but it's not like a sort of huge, it's not like a huge sort of barrier. Like I'm very happy to sort of say, look, I've got a learning disability and it's really bad. But whenever I qualified for SAS, so the additional, like the disabled students allowance, and I was like, well, I'll put it down because I get money from the government to, that's like the way that I sort of deal with it, or something will come off and I'll make a comment about it, and I get weird looks of like, why are you making that comment or something. I just deal with it like with humor and stuff.
I think when you start learning about this idea that like disability can be an identity and it's not actually your impairment that makes you disabled, it's the world around you. And everyone is absolutely sick of me banging on about the social model of disability, so I won't go into that again, but it is so true, because I suppose in the past people would be like, well, I don't have a disability, I can walk, I don't want to call myself disabled because that's negative, when obviously disabled isn't a bad word. And absolutely what you said about SAS, take all their money, make their pockets hurt. It's like the money's there.
Exactly.
First like found out about disabled students allowance, I thought it was like just an extra bursary or something, but you actually have to work to get it. It's not as easy as some people maybe think.
I was also going to say just another comment that I make that I get that I just thought would be quite amusing to share. And I think I told you this at Media Club, but it was basically like, why have one when you can have all three, or buy one, get one free, or because
it's like neurotypical economic efficiency. It's like, it's better to get all three, might as well.
So I obviously was sort of diagnosed with all three, but I only sort of properly learned that I was dyslexic when I was applying. Obviously I had to apply for all of the support for uni, had to get my medical diagnosis, and it said, oh yeah, you're also dyslexic. I've never sort of thought about that. I've always just thought that I'm dyspraxic and I've got dyscalculia. But I think with dyslexia as well, it's the whole sort of stereotypical of you struggle with your reading and stuff. Whereas, and then I realized, oh wait, it's the spelling, I can't spell, it's everything like that. So I think there is sort of like a little bit of, you've got to kind of change perceptions of what like these sort of invisible disabilities are, because
the first time that I say experienced or noticed other people in my class having dyslexia was, they got extra time during English exams or something like that, and there would be a large group of people that would say, well, that's not fair, I want that. And they just didn't understand that this wasn't like a thing that you get if you just ask for it. It's like, no, this is a reasonable adjustment that has been made due to your learning difficulties or disabilities. So it is just like ignorance up until the point where you learn about it, and then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And like you say, it really only was dyslexia. Like I hadn't actually heard about dyscalculia and dyspraxia until a lot later. I think that's the same for quite a lot of people. They just assume like, oh, if you're really bad at maths, it's just because you hate maths, or you're just not good at it, when in reality you could have one of these conditions and it's nothing to do with your want to be good at maths or your studying abilities and things like that. Although I don't know, I hated maths.
Still, regardless of it, hated it.
No. Aurora, can I ask you, like, when did you decide, or when did you feel like, oh, I'm gonna try and pursue a diagnosis for what you have?
Well, I mean, I didn't even think I had it. Like, it never crossed my mind that I could have ADHD until we were at the library together with Zena last year, December, and I was like, you know what, all these things kind of fit. And I just sat there, and then typical my brain, I just sat there instead of doing my work. I sat there for an hour looking all kind of online things. I was like, look, a lot of these fit. But then I was like, maybe, I don't know, whatever, even if it is, I've got exams now, I can't think about it. And then it did take me like quite a while, because then I started thinking about it. I was like, actually, like, not joking, like a lot of the things do fit. So I looked up like all kinds of like ADHD artists and like accounts, like awareness accounts on Twitter. It was like, okay, like even more things started like fitting. I was like, okay, that could work as well, and that also works. I think in like maybe April or something, especially like obviously over quarantine and all, I sat at home and had a lot more time to think because nothing was working. Because all of my typical ways to work around, like for me, for example, my ADHD is very much the inability to do stuff. Like I can't get up and actually sit down and work on things. So it's the more of the inactive one. I do have the hyperactivity as well, but not as badly. But yeah, so I was like, well, it's showing up a lot more now that I don't have, for example, the uni library to go to, because I knew I couldn't work at home, and then I couldn't work at home, but I was stuck at home. So then I was like, okay, maybe I should like actually think about looking into this. So I took me a bit, and I was like, okay, Mom, I sat my mom down. I was like, look, Mom, I think I might have this. And then we started looking into it. And then it was a bit complicated because I was in Germany over summer, over the quarantine period. So then I started looking into like getting diagnosed in Germany, but then I wouldn't have time because the first appointment time was end of September, but I knew I would be already back in Scotland, and they didn't do online things. So I was like, oh God. And then I looked up the one here, and I had to talk with my parents because we decided like go private, which I mean I only found out afterwards that the waiting times are like could be up to 5 years. So I'm like, even with a 1 year waiting time would have been too much because I'm a fourth year, so I'll probably be moving away from Scotland like May or June. So that wouldn't have been an option for me. The waiting time just been too long. I wouldn't have been here anymore. So we decided to go private, which it did take me like a good month or two to actually get up the courage to call, because that was kind of the final step. You know, you could need to like not just like think to yourself. It was the actual like I had to like, what's the word? Not attack it. That's not the right word.
Yeah.
But face the fact that okay, this is actually a thing. Then I mean, the appointment went easy. I had an appointment after a week, so did we notice the difference? Then yeah, she told me at the end of the service, at the end of it, okay, so you fulfill like 9 out of 9 of the inactive and 6 out of 9 of the hyperactivity thing. So, but it did take me like a good, not a full year, but like a good like 6, 7, 8 months to actually get up the courage and be like, okay, do something about it because I'm pretty sure you have it.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. We'll get into like complaining about the services in a hot minute because I bet we can talk a lot about that. But it's quite interesting that you said the two different types of ADHD. Like growing up, I used to think it was just hyperactivity. That was like the main quote symptom of it or whatever. And you know, when you weren't hyperactive and you were maybe struggling to get out of bed and do things, did that make you think, oh, I must not have it? Or were you aware?
Yes. I mean, to the beginning, because like I had the same thing. Like my main thought was obviously hyperactivity, you know, getting up and not being able to sit, something like that. So my first avenue to looking, do I have this, or was all those kind of, you know, self tests online, and so many of them are like, oh, like, do you feel the need to get up in class and walk around? And like, because I was like, I don't think I have the hyperactivity part. Because there's the thing, like, you can have both or just one of them. So it's kind of like 3 types, but obviously it's like a spectrum. So you can have a little bit of the hyperactivity.
Of course, yeah.
So I was like, oh, I don't think I have it. And she was like, are you impatient? And I was like, well, yeah. And then she was like, are you like, and I was like, yeah, I'm fiddling with like my hoodie strings at the moment. And during this talk, I'm actually at the moment like opening and closing the drawers of my desk. So, and then she was like, so are you impulsive? And I was like, well, I don't think I'm impulsive, but I'm very spontaneous. Like I can change my plans very quickly. I don't mind changing plans. And like, if I have a set thing, I can throw that whole thing over and do something else. The therapist was like, well, that's also one of the hyperactivity things. And I was like, you know, that where the mind blows me, and that was me at the moment. I was like, wow, that's the thing. And then it was like, in class, I don't get up, but I switch seating positions about every 2 minutes. So that was also a thing, which I just thought that's me. And then, you know, the wobbly leg, what's that called? Where you're like,
with your foot, like the
bouncing.
tapping.
Yeah. The tapping thing, I do that all the time. And I was like, I know that's been a thing probably since primary school. There's always been the friend who's like, oh, stop it, please. I'm like, okay. 2 seconds later, my mom goes like, Gina's like, stop it. So I've had the whole lecture hall like 5 But yeah, so like I was like it just didn't cross my mind at all. Like the idea, the stereotypes are so like having a strong hyperactivity focus. But yeah, again, like for me, the inactive thing, like for me, it can take, like, I can wake up in the morning at 10 and be like, I've set myself a plan the day, like a vague plan the day before. Okay, get up at 10, then get out of bed at 12 because I know myself. So I was like, give yourself some time, and then leave at 1 for the library. And then, I don't know, and then I end up leaving for the library at 6 because I've not managed to get out of bed until like 4. So it's stuff like that where I'm really in the, and the thing that bothered me the most was the fact that I was like, maybe I can like explain it with things that I just don't want to do. And I was like, okay, maybe that works easily. Like, I just don't want to do that, so of course I don't want to get up and sit down and do it. But there's also stuff that I just really want to, like, for example, I've been wanting to learn Korean for probably 3 years now. I've managed to learn the alphabet once about 2 years ago. I've forgotten it again because I can't stick to it. So I was like, well, I really want to do this. Why can't I? So it's things like that where it's like, okay, like, I should probably get, like, just like have a look at it and be like, is it this thing or not? Which, I mean, at the end, I'm happy about the diagnosis, but that shit was expensive. So I would have been like, shoot, if that was.
We used to, in school, it would be like the kid that, always bounced his knee or, like fiddled, like even chewing at your fingers or like pulling at your hair, all these like certain things. People would be like, oh, they're so annoying, just sit still, just calm down. And it's like kids don't know, or maybe kids don't notice as much. And then it must be quite difficult when it gets to your further school years and later on when you have to like start sitting exams or something, and then teachers are like, it's not a problem, don't, whatever, just ignore it. And I've heard as well that it's even more difficult for girls to get diagnosed for certain things just because of like implicit gender bias, and every psychological or medical study that's ever been done has only been done on young boys, I think.
And it's things like, the hyperactivity, like running around the room, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
They're more boy traits, you know what I mean? Like, if a boy runs around and is like active and wants to play all the time, that's more like it's more like, oh yeah, like boys are active. But if a girl does that, it's more of it like, sit down, do this, like be more ladylike, whatever, all that kind of stuff. So there's all the gender roles that also push it that women are more likely to have, like, I don't think coping mechanisms is the right word, but like ways to like work around your like symptoms, kind of like, obviously still you can't, like, but stuff like, switching your leg instead of, like, I had one boy in my class, I don't know if he had ADHD or not, but he would get up regularly every 2 seconds out of his seat to stand up in the middle of class and then sit down again. So stuff like that, like, I mean, I would hope a teacher would be like, don't be a girl, like, blah, blah, blah. But you've kind of learned not to do those things, because it's like, you sit lady, like, you do this and this, you do that. Like, girls are more quiet, they're more mature, they're more this, they're more that. So I think to a big extent that probably also plays a role in why girls are just not diagnosed with it, because we've just learned how to like work around it more than, because boys behavior is a lot more permission, like there's a lot more permission to act, not how society, you know what I mean, like not with the rules and everything.
Definitely. I think masking is a term that I've heard before. I don't know if that like fits or if it was in other contexts.
To be honest, I'm not like most familiar with all the terms yet, so it could be.
What do you study again?
Psychology, but like we've established racist and everything.
I don't know how the brain works. Do any of us? No.
Nah, I think that's going to be one of those great mysteries that we're never going to fully find out.
So like in your studies, Aurora, you've obviously come across probably like examples or what's the word, case studies of like these conditions, and look back and you're like, that was a whole load of cowpat.
I'm not sure. I mean, probably have come across it, but to be, my brain is a sieve, so it's probably gone. But like, there's just things. What bothers me most about psychology is not. I mean, a lot of the topics as well. And I don't want to like slander my lecturers here, but I'm like, look, you're psychologists. You're supposed to know about this shit, and you're so incredibly inflexible. It's stuff like, well, no, lecturers are really working hard as well. I'm like, I don't know shit about you. That's your job. Like, come on, like they're really inflexible with those kind of things. So you kind of have to have like proof for stuff. For example, you'd think, like psychology would be like, yeah, recording is fine. Absolutely not. You need to have permission to record lectures, all that kind of shit. Where I'm like, off.
Yeah.
Like,
I
you
know.
should know better. Of all the people, like, you'd hope the psychologists know best. They're all high and mighty. And then again, like, it's the same problem in sociology as well. It's overwhelmingly white, it's straight, and male. So
I can give you the thumbs up for that, because I'm doing social sciences.
Yeah.
So one of them is, and it's all like these men and all like white, and you're just like, oh God. I think especially as like a woman, and you're just like, oh God, this isn't good. This is, to cut it brief, we've got like this sociological text, which is like one of the main texts, and it's this dude, and he wrote it in the 50s, and he keeps referring it to men, and you're literally like, oh God. Like, even at that point, obviously it's like with the whole sort of the women, and you're like, oh God, why are you just referring it to being so sort of male dominated and stuff like that? But yeah, but I suppose the good thing is with like recorded lectures, I suppose a good thing is for me is that I can sort of pause it and then take notes and then carry on with it. But yeah, I will
I have
say
no idea how I survived the last 3 years sustained 2-hour lectures.
I know.
I can't do any more than 1-hour lectures. Like,
Yeah. Nah, I know this sounds really bad, but I'm quite happy that exams got cancelled, because my advanced time modern studies with extra time was about 3 hours, and I was just like, oh God, just sitting there for 3 hours.
That's to take it further. Like, it's almost good that universities have had this moment where they're forced to make accommodations for like certain students. Well, disabled students have been fighting for it for over like 15 years, but then all of a sudden the majority of students need it, so they're like, oh crap, we actually have to provide this now. And it's like, we have been asking for this for years, and we know it's going to work, and we are happy, we can help implement it, and we can do all these things, we know it's going to work. And lecturers are like, how can we record things, how are people going to do stuff? And it's like,
it's always like, the argument was always, oh, we can't record it because of copyright stuff. And I'm like, well, it seems not to be a problem now, is it?
Yeah, exactly. So it just shows you.
Also, other thing that I'm so glad about, that they're recording lectures, which this sounds really, really weird, but PowerPoints, right? So I sort of learn with PowerPoints, and it's always so irritated me with like lecturers or people, and they flip through the slides too quickly, and I'm trying to take notes of the slides. So I'm like, oh, thank God I can pause it, and getting sent the slides anyway. So, but
yeah, whereas before, usually students have to like fight to get slides.
Yeah, or get them turned back. But I think it's the whole thing as well of, oh God, it's like a majority, now that it's like a majority issue of obviously pretty much basically everyone's online now, there has been a change. And if you think about it, they're all like such little things that kind of could have been implemented before this whole mess. But I suppose that's one positive of this whole of COVID, which you've got to find some sort of positive, I guess.
Definitely highlighted a lot of ableist inequality, let's just say that, like in good ways and bad ways. Obviously in bad ways, there's been a lot of examples of disabled students not getting the support they need because they're maybe not on campus as much, they're not able to speak to their lecturers, and if you're not having like that constant contact and making those relationships, then it can be quite hard to maybe say that you've got a disability and you need extra support. Because I believe the way that Napier works is before you come to university, you disclose your disability. And if you don't and you get into university, it's a lot harder. So obviously, Grace, you disclosed beforehand, whereas Aurora's, halfway out the door and having to tell them.
Basically it was put it on UCAS, got an email, basically said, look, you need to fill in all this sheet, fill in this form with like all your sort of medical to sort of so we 100% no, filled that in, had a phone call, and then had an assessment basically of just what like support we think you should have and stuff. So yeah, but the original with the actual assessment was so I could qualify for the DSA, and then we're like, look, we know you've got like a diagnosis and stuff like that, but we just need, I don't know, I got like the whole thing of, it was like, we trust you that this is all, but we kind of just need to make sure kind of thing. And I actually, really weirdly, I found it as sort of like a positive, because I was waiting on a conditional, and this obviously happened all over the summer, and it was kind of one of those weird of like, okay, I could probably get the grade, you're willing to take me, kind of thing. And then I got the grade, so that was quite good.
And you're here.
I'm here,
Virtually.
yeah, virtually.
That's so true. With the DSA, a lot of the times when you have a diagnosis, it is just making sure that they tick boxes and that you like match up what you have to the support you need. And but more so trying to get your point of view, because if they did, okay, this person has dyslexia, this means they need this, and then they just give you it without talking to you about it. It really needs to be collaborative. But as I say, that's great when you already have a diagnosis to start with, because I suppose if you just went in like, look, I need all these arrangements, they'd be like, why? Go and prove that you have this thing first. And they say that as if you can be like, okay, sit there a minute, I'll phone my doctor, get a diagnosis in 10 minutes, and they'll send you an email. And as Aurora will say, you know, she's like went across 2 countries to get a diagnosis almost.
Private diagnosis made it easier with uni because I got like a massive report sent to me after it. So I've got like, I mean, I guess what made it easier for them, I don't qualify for the DSA because I've not lived here long enough. And I don't need a lot of extra things at the moment. Everything's online. So most of the things that would have been like, it would be like, oh, you can have headphones during the exams. I'm like, well, they're online, so I guess it doesn't matter.
True.
So yes, it was pretty easy for me this time, luckily, but
yeah. I imagine it's maybe like saving them money in some ways, because when I got DSA, it was for accessible taxis between campus. That must have been costing them a hefty amount to drag me between my halls and the campus 3 times a week.
Got to make the most of it.
Yeah, I would be like,
it's saving you the money.
On a sunny day, I can just roll one way, go down this really dodgy street, and then I'm kind of at Merchiston. But I got the taxi anyway because, well, especially when it was raining. It would take the taxi like probably twice as long to go the way that I wanted to roll. But I was like, and the way they kind of worded it, it's like, well, you're entitled to this, so you should take it. Don't be proud and just say that like, oh no, it's fine, I'll do it myself, blah, blah, blah. But I think part of that, it was so easy for me to do that was because I have, it's not went away, I have a physical disability and I'm in a power chair, so they can't say like, you're not disabled, you don't need assistance. So let's segue into the next question there and ask, so thinking on from the last session and our like recent discussions and things like that, when you're thinking about invisible disabilities and when we talk about representation as well, it is very common that although disability representation is abysmal, it is usually very physical disabilities. So what is your 2 cents on this need to improve?
I personally think it needs to start, I mean, obviously parents and everything, but at school, because a lot of things that, like, now obviously looking back at it, things that I struggle with, like, you know, doing homework. I never did my homework for like 10 years. I did it on the bus or in the bathroom at school or something like that. So stuff like that, it's like, it was, I assumed, you know, I had a hard life at home, which I'm like, it's good that they check up on that, obviously. But I'm also like, there are other alternatives than the child being lazy and not just wanting to do it. But, and then it's just stuff like, I've seen a lot of people mention, you know, fidget spinners. I didn't personally have one, but they were originally made for neurodivergent people to be like fidget in class, but still paying attention. And stuff like that, you know, like doodling around like on a piece of paper, like those things that were like way too harshly punished for the fact that for a lot of people those are just necessary background things to do. So even if you're not diagnosed, it doesn't interrupt the teacher in any way if the child's sitting there doodling little flowers on a piece of paper. Like, it doesn't make a big difference. So I think it needs to start at that more like acceptance in teachers, because like if the teacher is accepting it, it'll also like be an example for the children. So we had one guy in my class had Asperger's, so they sat the whole level for all like 10, 11. So they sat us all down without him. These are the things that happen with that. This is how it like shows up. Deal with it. And we're all like, okay. So it was never an issue, ever. No, I mean, it might have been one. Not as far as I noticed, because obviously I'm not him, so I can't say. It might have been an issue in some way. But I think if that was the way that most teachers dealt with just anything like, fidgeting, stuff like that. Don't make it a big thing. First of all, don't point it out all the time, because that's also not going to be fun for the child. Like, normalize those things, because they happen with a lot of invisible disabilities. The fidgeting, the not like looking around, not wanting to make eye contact is so overrated. I used to make eye contact all the time. So things like that, don't be like, oh, you're impolite if you don't make eye contact, that kind of shit.
Yeah.
Where it's like, no, listen, that can that can be really hard for a lot of people. So yeah, so I think a big part of it is just education. And with that, I don't even mean, obviously you don't need to sit down and be like, these are all the invisible disabilities you're never going to finish. But just like more accepting general, there's no need to like go directly like, oh, look at that. Like, just like, if you want to ask, it's easier than just like going behind that person's back and be like, really weird.
Yeah, like, oh, that's weird. What are you doing?
Like, hey, why do you babble so much? And I'd be like, excuse me. Like, this one.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
I think another thing is that you've just got to try and, because I think there is sort of this huge big sense of, oh, we can't talk about it, or it's like this sort of, and I think the whole thing is you've just got to, it's like, I think with the thing that they said with obviously Black Lives Matter, that they were going to try and sort of start, you've got to start young, like you've got to start with like the kids, because if the kids are going to grow up with this mindset, then it's kind of hard to change it as you get older. So I think it's like you said, when you were all sat down and like when you were sort of like 10 or 11 and were told, look, this is this, it's totally, your like classmate has this is totally normal and stuff. If there is representation, it makes it easier for like another person to sort of be like, okay, even if it's like one person and it's like, okay, they have it, I'm like, and I have it, and it's sort of fine, because I was very much like, there were other people who had, I don't know if anybody in my year had dyspraxia, but there were a few people who had dyslexia, and it was very much kind of, you're not different, because obviously there's like the whole thing of, oh yeah, you're not the only person in the world, but I think as long as if you like see at least like one other person, then it's kind of that whole sort of, okay.
It's like,
definitely.
The community feel is so important, and I think Aurora, in the session you talked about the idea that sometimes people with invisible disabilities have to quote come out, and obviously it's invisible, so you can't like see it, and then it all, as soon as like that happens, if someone quote comes out with that thing, like everyone's opinions or assumptions automatically change. And it's like it would be great to get to a point where at some point, if, I don't know, like a big Hollywood actress or actor or something said, I have ADHD and I do this and I do this, folk aren't going to be like, oh, that's weird. And then you start like rethinking their entire life. It's like, okay, that's cool. And then young kids will look at that and be like, oh my gosh, that actress has what I have and look what they're doing. But yeah, it's easier for kids, I think.
They just accept it so much easier, just like, okay, and then they continue on. I don't want to think about it too long.
Yeah, and I think if you make it, the whole thing is sort of, especially when you're sort of like an adult, it just gets way too overcomplicated.
One presumption that I think a lot of people have, and this will be like the last topic we'll talk about, is the idea of hierarchies in the disability community. Like I said, if you have an invisible disability, you kind of have to come out, whereas other people that go around in wheelchairs or rollators and walking sticks, like they don't have to do that, so they don't have that extra barrier. And I think often in the disability community, wheelchair users feel like this is their movement and this is like the only disability, this is the first disability that we have to deal with before we help anyone else, and that is so ridiculous and so awful. And it just shows you that like disabled people can be ableist arseholes as well. It's like kind of comparing it to, I guess, if feminists, like second wave feminists, say like we really, we should just help white women first and then we'll get to black women. It's like, no, you have to include everybody. So yeah, in the disability community there seems to be like a hierarchy depending on how acceptable the disability is. Aurora, can you research that part?
Yeah, it was basically like it was a lot of like how it's like the more like acceptable, the more I call it aesthetic, but that was also part of it. Non-disabled people, the less ugly it is, the more accepted it is.
Yeah.
So it's basically a lot from like the non-disabled persons, like non-disabled community's perspective. So it's not from the disabled community, but from the non-disabled one. So again, like, like for example, like the example they used was looking at veterans. So like, but like I'll just take one part of that. Like for example, someone with like an amputee, like a missing leg or something, is easier for society, like the non-disabled community, to accept because it's more aesthetic than someone, for example, has facial burns, because you kind of have to confront that more. And then I think the abstractness of invisible disabilities, and like the thing, like for example, they used the example of PTSD, but I think that would apply on like most mental health conditions, or invisible, like neurodivergent and all that kind of stuff. It's because you can't see it that it's a lot harder for people to wrap their head around it, so they don't really want to confront that. And then my little psychology brain is now telling me, yes, they don't want to confront their like internalized guilt and all that kind of stuff, their biases and their stereotypes and all that. So
that's so true what you said, like, oh, if you can't, like, out of sight, out of mind, and then as soon as you have to deal with it, or someone comes out with this disability, it's like, oh, so I have to rethink my entire wiring, I guess. So it's I don't know, it's just like the non-disabled people are like, oh, I need to do work, I need to respect more people. What?
a lot of people are like, oh no, I'm not like ableist, I'm like, listen, or like, I'm not sexist, but I'm like, listen, yes you are, just say I am. What can I do to change?
That is definitely one thing that annoys me, when it's like I'm not sexist but, or I'm not ableist but, and you're like, it's not like a sort of 2D thing. It's like you could say like one thing and you could be like, yeah, not ableist, and then you say another thing and you're like, well, hold on a second, you actually are being ableist. And I think as well, because disability is quite a good example, because there's so many sort of variations of what a disability is, and it's kind of one of those things of people automatically have, like with a sort of a physical disability, people's like, if you sort of I'm sure if you like said to somebody, oh, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of like the word disability, like the chances, I'm sort of generalizing a little bit, but I'm sure like most people would say sort of like maybe like wheelchair, or and you're like, well, there's so many other ones, like under the Equality Act, obviously all three of us are under this, but then it's the fact all three of us are sort of completely different. And like, obviously I think the three of us are a really good example that there's just so many variations. You've kind of got to accept that there are just so many sort of variations. And I think that's definitely one thing that sort of does need to be challenged, is you've got to change people's mindsets and be like, look, you've got to sort of be aware of all of this.
No,
I think
absolutely.
Like two parts of like, unless you confront the fact that you have wrong ideas about this or that, you're never going to change those. So I might as well go out and be like, yeah, I have like ableist ideas, or I have sexist ideas. Like, I obviously don't go to a person like, change my mind.
That probably wouldn't be the best. Like, that probably wouldn't be the best plan of action.
But like, educate yourself, and I think like that's it. Like, when people are just in the little bubble of thinking, oh, I'm like perfect, I'm not ableist, but then they go out and throw out a lot of shit, they're never going to change that. So they kind of need to be confronted with that. And unless you like confront it, or confront yourself as well. Because one thing, if someone went up to me and was like, hey, you're doing this and this, I'd be like, no, I'm not. And then like, I have to like accept that first myself as well. So I think that part's often missing, like, to actually get anywhere. And then, I mean, let's not talk about all the social and people and everything that's
the whole other layer of that is.
I think it's important not to get complacent when we talk about like disability to start with, and we are all, I would say, we're like, if there was a staircase to working towards unlearning our ableist thoughts, I feel like we're ahead of a lot of people. Kind of annoying when you're like, oh my god, I have to drag everyone up to this stage, and then we have to go even further. So it's like, under the Equality Act, yeah, I suppose rightfully we are all protected, but in practice maybe only one of us will actually get noticed because of our disabilities, and that's absolutely crap. And I think what we spoke about in terms of education and awareness is so important, because then less people might get like confronted with the, you're not actually disabled. because then you have to get over that mindset to then break down what you actually think disability is, and then you have to break down what being disabled means and how it's not a bad thing. And there's just so many steps, but these are like this is the start of these discussions. Yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there because
Sounds good.
Before we get into another rant.
Yeah, go off on another point about how the world is unfair, even more unfair than we thought.
even more
We
than
ran for
an hour
hours on
ago.
it.
Yeah.
So I'll wrap it
Yeah.
up here,
Yeah.
and please come back, Grace.
Oh, definitely. I've enjoyed this. Gives me a
Right.
nice opportunity to talk to people. The fact that I can't really do anything in terms of social stuff.
True, this is
Yeah.
socializing.
Good. Yeah, this is socializing and talking about important issues. Perfect combo.
And that's what Fem Soc is all about.
Yeah.
So, thank you also, Aurora. You were here. You were
It
there.
was fun.
Awesome. And if everyone wants to join in our conversations next time, you can follow us at FemSoc Napier, of course, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We welcome your comments, especially about this. And if anyone else wants to come on and talk about things, we'll probably have another 1 or 2 episodes this semester. Maybe. It's almost Christmas. Who knows? We'll post about it on our social media. Yeah. So we will see and hear you in the next one. Bye.
Bye.